All right, today's lecture for Chapter 5. Now, just as a slight note, keep in mind that we're on about page 100. I think it's like 112 or something like that. So if for some reason you have not actually started reading yet, I know the first test isn't yet, but if for some reason you haven't started reading, you're, for lack of a better word, kind of boned at this point. Um, tr- don't let yourself get behind if you're doing it, because you'd have 100 pages of reading, a couple hours worth of lectures to listen to, all the notes to take and study. You really just can't let yourself get behind. It's really a self-motivated course here. And that's I try to do the discussions and whatnot to help you kind of stay in tune. Just don't put things off. It's just too easy to do. Big trap. Boned is an industry word, of course. Um, so we will. There isn't really a lot of ignore it stuff in this chapter. If for no other reason, we finally get a chapter that's all about psychology, and it doesn't just involve the physical components. Um, so I'll go over the stuff you'll definitely just have to know. I'm not going to go over here because they go over some of these things really, really well in the book. They go over Piaget right from the very beginning. They talk about some of the different cognitive stages, because this whole chapter is about the cognitive stages of a baby's development, up until the first couple of years. And Piaget was really, really big on this. Not only did he have the sensory motor stage in the beginning, but he had the sensory motor stage divided up into other stages that they go over in the book, and they're very thorough. So know all that stuff. The only thing that I do want to say is usually how we describe children in the sensory motor stage is as little explorers, or even better, little scientists. And we don't use that word lightly, because you actually kind of lose the scientific rigor as you age. These babies will do anything to just explore the world in an oddly scientific fashion. If you have a baby, say 6 months, 12 months old, enough so that they can sit up at least, and you put them in a bath, they far, far prefer it if the bath is running while they're in there. Instead of drawing a bath and then putting the baby in it, you actually just put the baby in, and because they love the water falling down, they'll put their hand under, they'll move their hand in different ways, they'll see how the water splashes, and it's like they're learning the physics of the world through personal experience, and you can see them just literally experimenting. Well, what happens if I do this? Okay, that's an interesting observation. If I do this, what happens if I cup my hand? And so they're just completely exploring the world through the sensory motor phase. It's really fascinating. They're just sponges for information. On page 124, there's a little ask yourself box, and I know these have come up over and over again. Um, I really want you to focus on these boxes, because this is the depth of knowledge that you will be expected to have on the test. On page 124, for example, it says that it would be a great question for a test. It says that, you know, a 12-month-old sees the father hide a cookie under the red cup. So she picks up the red cup and gets it. He does it again. He does it again. This time, he takes the cookie, hides it under a yellow cup. Why does she lift the red cup? It's a great depth of knowledge question that you should be able to easily answer after reading the text. Okay, so let's go over the new stuff. Like I said, they mentioned the sensory motor substages. One of the things that I wanted to point out, because I didn't think they really went over this a lot, was you have stage 1 and 2. They end at about 4 months. And just more for an applied section, like I said, I try to get applied here, is that a lot of people worry a lot about spoiling children. And that's understandable. It's very easy to spoil children. Tomorrow I'll have a whole lecture on how to create a spoiled brat, because we go over the cognitive and emotional development tomorrow, and the social. But up until for the first couple of stages, they're not actually looking outside of themselves. And this is a very interesting cognitive stage, because they're only concerned with themselves. You will see them moving, but they're just moving their legs around. From an outside perspective, A baby up until about 4 months old is boring. They are not interesting at all. They're just wiggling, peeing little spuds. They don't do anything. Um, and that's because they're totally focused on themselves. It is literally impossible to spoil a 3-month-old baby or to really teach it almost anything. So if every time it cries, you hear this a lot. Say, well, the baby's crying. Don't go to it immediately because you'll teach it that it can cry just to get your attention. Well, that's true, but only when they're cognitively developed enough to understand that. For the first few months, they pretty much need constant attention, and this does not spoil them. All it does is give them a good, affectionate environment so that, for lack of a better description, they feel more comfortable exploring their own bodies, because that's all they can do. For lack of a better description, they're just not smart enough to focus on you. It's all about needs. After that, of course, they start to focus externally, which is a huge cognitive leap. And once they start focusing externally, now they're really going to start to be spoiled. This is when you're going to get the 6 months old that trains their parents to wake up 5 or 6 times a day to give them a hug, give them a bear, and go back to bed. At that age, by all means, this is a child who is ready to be in, be in their own room and learn when nighttime is and all these things, because they can really start to understand the environment around them. I do want to say, however, that to beware taking anything too seriously in the research if it's interpreted as how a baby is thinking. We can tell, or at the very least what it's thinking about. We can tell how a baby is thinking. We can say, okay, at this stage it's clearly can't understand anything outside of itself. At this stage it is. That sort of generalization is easy to make. But a lot of people will make these very grand, kind of ludicrous assumptions about the research, like, well, babies like looking at faces. When they're newborn, babies really enjoy looking at faces. I mean, if you think about the logical leap you're making, you actually are saying you know what the baby is thinking. You know what they like. But look at this from a scientific perspective. Is there any way to measure that? When they test what babies like, they're not really saying what babies like. They're saying what babies attend to. How long they look at things. You put a picture in front of a baby, and this is actually the experiment that they did that made people jump to the conclusion that babies liked looking at faces. If you put a picture in front of a baby of like a boat or a sailboat or a schooner, if you want to call it that, and they'll look at it for a couple of seconds and look away. If you put a picture in front of a baby's face of a face, they will look at it for much longer. But again, really what you're looking at here is attention, how long they want to attend to something. And it's still usually just a matter of a couple of seconds and then they'll look away. They're very easily distracted. They're babies. What can you expect? So keep in mind, whenever you read anything like this, think about how it's actually measured. And this is a key for any sort of psychological science. How you measure it is really important as to how you're going to interpret the data. It does go over memory. My notes are over here. That's why I keep looking over to the side. It does go over memory quite a bit in the book. And one of the things it goes over, I think it's like page 120, is both recall and recognition memory. And I'm going to mention this because, well, we're just talking about the infants and toddlers right now. It's going to come up a lot more importantly throughout the rest of the semester whenever we talk about memory. The fact is there's two types of memory for these purposes anyway, recall and recognition. And when you study, typically speaking, especially bad students, students that have it, when I say bad students, I mean not necessarily idiots, but people that have a hard time taking tests. If you're one of those people that you take a test and you just freeze, you can't remember anything, you're probably having a conflict between recall and recognition memory. This means that when you're studying for recognition. You're studying to try to recognize something, as if you're expecting life is going to be a multiple choice quiz, and all you have to do is recognize the word. Recall memory is, of course, completely different, where you don't have to see anything. Somebody just says, what's the how do you find the area of a circle, and you just say what the formula is. You don't have to pick a formula out of a bunch of available formulas. You don't have to just recognize it. You have to actually recall it on your own. And this sort of memory is a lot stronger, and it's the sort of memory that I require for my multiple choice tests, for example. So if I were to ask a question like this on a multiple choice test, and I were to say, you were to have different types of memory, what are they? You wouldn't have to just recognize the word recognition and recall. I would have a bunch of other synonyms in there, so that you would have to, I would have things that looked very similar to it, so that just recognizing it would not be enough. I would have other things in there that were also in the text, just not this one thing, so that you go, oh, I remember reading about this, but that's not what we're talking about. So you have to have more than just recognition memory for any sort of collegiate level, but especially a psychology test, because we know how to make tests. This is what we do. Now, this is the chapter is obviously about cognitive development. And one of the key aspects of cognitive development that we focus on very, very strongly is intelligence. And there's a lot of social reasons for this, which, I suppose would get into more of the social psychology course. But essentially it boils down to the fact that intelligence is a really key component to what we want in our children. And we as a society are kind of in denial about this, because it breaches our own expectations. We're very afraid of being disappointed by this, so we have a tendency to lie to ourselves and go through a lot of delusions, and even have quaint little folksy sayings that are basically complete lies. I mean, if you talk to a parent, I mean, this is just a classic stereotype here. If you talk to a parent and you say, well, is it going to be a boy or a girl? And they don't know yet, they'll say, well, we don't care as long as it's healthy, right? That's what they say, as long as it's healthy. Kind of the stereotype that we do in this country. But in reality, that's not really what we care about. What we care about is the intelligence. I mean, if you had a choice of having a child who was, most parents, anyway, I'm not necessarily saying you in specific, but most parents, if they had a choice, said, you're going to have one of two babies. One will be wheelchair bound and sickly for their entire life, but highly intelligent. The other one will be strong as an ox, just an amazing constitution, very healthy their whole life, but mentally retarded. Which child would you prefer to have? And almost universally, most people would say the highly intelligent child. It's the mental health that we really care about far more than the physical health. So with this, intelligence becomes a really of great importance to parents. Although oddly, generally people don't understand intelligence all that well. We are a nation filled with people that want to be exceptional. And the fact is we aren't. Very few people are exceptional. That's why they're called exceptions. The whole base of exceptional is based around exception. So most people are not. Most people don't have a single exceptional thing about them. And in other countries, this is very accepted. A lot of the rural Asian countries, for example, if you're just a simple farmer, you're like, well, that's fine. I can provide for my family. Farming is a very, very honorable, very noble profession. I'm at least a good father and I'm not saying he's an exceptional father. He's not the best in the world. I can give to my community. I'm a wheel and I'm a cog in the structure here. I'm part of the community, and that's good. That's what I strive for, and that's what I achieve. But that's not good enough in our society. We want to be the best. We don't want to be a cog in a wheel. We want to be the faceplate of the clock. But the fact is, any society doesn't need that many faceplates. You need 1,000 cogs in that clock for the one faceplate. For every person smart enough to engineer and design a factory, you need 1,000 people to work in it. And so this is how we evolved. We evolved to not be that exceptional, including intelligence-wise. And we have a really hard time with that in this culture. And there are other cultures that have a hard time with it as well, but we're not in those cultures. So intelligence tests, people have a really difficult time with this. Half the people, the intelligence test, and they go over this on page, I didn't write down the page number, but they have the normal curve of it, of the intelligence test, and the average IQ is 100. And this is the same for children's intelligence or adults' intelligence. They have different tests, of course, for these things, but the average IQ score is 100, and the standard deviation is 15, which means that the majority of people are going to fall within 15 points of this, between 85 and 115. Like 60% of the people are going to fall within 85 and 115, around 60%. But on the other hand, this means that half of the people in this country are below average intelligence, by definition. A lot of the people you meet on a day-to-day basis, just walking around town, the majority of people you meet are below average intelligence. And that is because the above average intelligent people are going to be working, as your engineers and your doctors and your lawyers and whatnot. So they're going to surround themselves with people who are more similar to themselves, just by virtue of their profession and their activities. So on a regular basis, most of the people are actually below average, because the exceptional people kind of sequester themselves off to the side. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing, so we can't put judgments on these sorts of things. And you really shouldn't be putting judgments on the children either. They are going to be average for the most part, or below average, or a little bit above average. And if they are a little bit above average, it's probably not that noteworthy. Probably just a little bit above average. Even though it's very important to us, our putting importance on intelligence doesn't make intelligence work any differently. It's just how the statistics work. IQ, for example, we consider hereditary. We figure, and we look at it like this. We say, oh, well, of course he's smart. Look at his parents. They're really smart themselves. But this doesn't actually make a lot of sense. They mention in the book that IQ is very strongly linked to poverty. So people in impoverished situations, their IQ is not as high as people who are well off. And it's actually a very strong correlation. But if this were completely genetic, this wouldn't make any sense at all. So it's very clear that your environment is a huge component of your cognitive development. Essentially, and we're going to go over this in ways that, quite frankly, is going to piss a lot of you off, which is why I went over this in the discussion for everybody section. There are some facets of parenting that, for lack of a better description, poor people in this country, those of low SES, do very, very badly. And they do not promote what is very valued in this country, which is intelligence, which is why those of low socioeconomic status have a tendency to score relatively low on intelligence tests. There's nothing wrong with the tests. It's the fact that they were not reared in a way, they weren't raised in a way that really fosters their intelligence, that lets it come out. It doesn't. It's not just that they don't get book learning to educate them about all these facts and figures. Their situation does not encourage them to think critically on the same level that a different parent would. Now, as an example of one parent teaching their child something that another parent wouldn't, that's correlated to socioeconomic status, is that there's this is a little bit more related to adolescent psychology, but it's something that's very important to people, so I'll use it as an example. Is parenting styles when it comes to teenagers and what their careers are going to be. There's two different attitudes that people often take. One attitude is that you're going to tell your child what career to take. You're going to say, okay, you're either going to be a doctor or a lawyer. You're going to study very hard. You're going to go to college, and And these are your two choices, and I'll support you as long as you choose one of these two or three things. And other than that, I'll pretty much consider you a bum and a vagrant. And people really look down upon that sort of parenting. The other attitude is say, look, honey, you can do whatever you want. I will support you. If you want to be a doctor, that's fine. But if you wanna work in McDonald's your whole life, that's fine too. I'll support you in that decision, and I'll always be here for you. And that attitude is very romanticized and glorified, but ultimately speaking, really ineffective. That's why I said some of this kind of irritates people. It doesn't work that well. If you actually look at the long-term happiness of people, the people who are kind of pushed into careers, they're much more successful. They're happier with their lives, and they're happier because they have more things to be happy about, quite honestly. And so even though it's not really encouraged as a parenting style, it really, really works. But it's something that people of low socioeconomic status almost never do. They just rear their children a little differently, and the other attitude is seen as pushy, and people really even hate the idea that it works better. But statistically speaking, the people that are pushed into careers are simply a lot happier, and it makes sense if you think about it, because children make stupid decisions. It's like their job. They have a full-time job of making stupid decisions. You're asking a child who you know makes stupid decisions to choose whatever career they want to. Well, it's going to be a stupid decision. Everything else they do is. So at least chances are it's going to be a bad decision. Probably why people change careers so often. So there's a lot of things you can do with this, and people do this right from the very beginning. And so some people are basically raised kind of naturally hindered from their society to be of less intelligence. The last thing that I want to cover is baby talk. And they cover this a little bit in the book, but they did some, and it's a good example of how media sometimes kind of distorts research findings. They wanted to know whether or not baby talk was good for kids. So they did some experiments, and they found out, okay, baby talk, very, very good for children. And so they went ahead and they published this, and media outlets picked it up, and they say, okay, apparently baby talk is good. So now people are going around going goo goo baby to their babies, and this is totally not what they researched. When they researched baby talk, they defined baby talk as talking to a baby, like actual English words talking to a baby. And that's very, very good. And they mention that in the book. It's very healthy for children. You talk to them like they're children, but you also speak in real words, because the fact of the matter is, babies learn language through imitation. And they have some very specific physiological and mental hurdles on how to pronounce words and that sort of stuff. But one of the worst things you can do is to speak like a baby to a baby. And unfortunately, the media, just like taking off with this result and interpreting it completely incorrectly, got a lot of people to talk like babies. I mean, whether you do this or somebody else does this, how many people do you know that have a kid and refer to their bottle as a binky? Okay? It's a horrible idea. Call it a bottle. They're going to learn through imitation. They're going to try to talk like you. They mention in the book, you don't even have to correct your children. And not really necessarily for the reasons you would think. It's not always because if you correct your child too much, they get self-conscious and feel bad about themselves. Don't be too involved in self-esteem. We're a little too involved in self-esteem in this particular country. Just the fact that it's just not that functional to constantly correct a child if their pronunciation is off. All it does is kind of give you the impression of somebody not to emulate, but just as somebody that's going to correct them all the time. More of a disciplinarian than an example. And what they need is an example. So if you talk normally to your child, they will start to talk. If you have, and some things people consider very cultural. I know somebody that calls their grandmother Nana. This is not an English word. It's grandmother, grandma would be fine, and they say, well, that's just what we call it in our family. Like, okay, well, then your family hinders the child's development. Perhaps not by a lot, but by a little bit. So you might want to make a decision on whether or not your family wants to have this effect. Sometimes there's drawbacks, and that's why cultures evolve and develop. you don't call a bottle a baba or a bottle. You speak to your child, like it's a child, and deal with the fact that their communication is going to be a lot rougher than yours. Um, and as long as you don't even speak with a reduced vocabulary. This is a really big mistake that a lot of people make. They speak with a reduced vocabulary because they don't want to talk over the kid's head. By all means, go ahead, talk over the kid's head. Kids love to ask questions. They love, like I said, they just learn about the world. That's what they do. If they don't know what you're saying, they'll ask, and that's fine. It gives them a. This is actually one of the reasons why people who are highly educated tend to have children who are highly educated as well. It's because they fit really well into the college environment, because their whole life they've already heard this level of speaking. So that just kind of fosters the intelligence. It fosters the linguistic skills, and they do a lot better in college courses. They can write better, they can speak better, they can present themselves better. Um, that's it. If you have any questions, let me know.